Hello and welcome to this edition of Google Firestarters. I'm Neil Perkin, the curator of Google Firestarters and moderator, and also the founder of consultancy business Only Dead Fish. So Firestarters was a series of live events that we did at Google for approaching a decade, actually, for the advertising and marketing and media community. And we pivoted the events into virtual interviews and chats, and with the interesting and the interested of the industry, as we like to put it. And today's guest is no exception. So let me introduce you to Katie Dreke. So Katie, would you just say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm originally from Seattle. I have a background in agency, but across a pretty broad swath of digital agencies and traditional agencies, and also spent some time client side, both working at Adidas and also for the last 7 years at Nike. Although in this exciting COVID year, I'm now individually consulting as a global strategist and innovation strategist, and really kind of out there mixing it up with brands as they're trying to figure out where we go next. So it's kind of a wild and exciting time.
Fantastic, it is indeed. All right, good. So, Katie, I'd love to, as you know, Firestarters is loosely structured around the 5 questions, which kind of form the backbone of what we do here. So, straight into our first question, really, and relevant. I think that you worked across both client side and agency side. So, agencies like Wieden's and 180 in Amsterdam, and then you worked in Droga 5, of course, in Sydney, and Adidas and Nike. So, lots of different sort of agency and client-side experience. So across all of that, I'd really love to understand what's the best thing that you've actually learned in your career across all of those different positions.
I mean, I think that's a hard question to answer, but I think I have maybe 2 sort of themes that kind of emerge when I think about that stuff. I mean, some of it is really about the humanity part of our business, regardless how you come in on it. I love the concept of everything is interesting to someone who's interested. And I think throughout my work career, whether it was on the agency side or even internally on the corporate side, sometimes you're asked to do work on a piece of business or work on an assignment where you're like, I'm really not that interested in this. How am I going to get excited about this work? And I think back on my life and some of the clients that I was asked to work on. I worked on for example, a pitch for Western Union. Being an American, I was like, oh gosh, that's like an emergency thing, for when things have gone wrong, your car's broken down by the side of it. How am I going to get excited about this? But once I became interested in the people who use this service, which is largely, the international diaspora, people who have left their home country, taking a risk and are sending remittances back to their home country. It's actually the 3rd largest economy in the world, the Western Union remittances. And in some cases, it's 1/3 of certain nations' GDP. Suddenly you start getting into the work and you can't help but be interested. And when you start applying that to, women who are, heads of family shopping for groceries in Australia. Okay, so what's special about that? Well, in Australia, they have crazy weather. They'll have heat waves. They'll have floods. Woolies wanted to sell fresh food to its constituents around the nation. Sometimes food couldn't actually reach the store in time. And so each day when you'd go to the grocery store, the price would fluctuate wildly like the stock market, which then led to us going, okay, well, we'll create a fresh food tracker on the website. So moms who are trying to budget and who are trying to time their trip to the grocery store appropriately won't walk it and then find that, fresh tomatoes are 3x what they were the day before. Like this is, normally you wouldn't think grocery shopping might be that interesting. This is really interesting because there's this crazy dynamic that's happening in this particular market. Frequent flyers, sneaker collectors, gamers, whatever, like you may not be one of those people, but thinking about who they are as people, putting yourself in their shoes, I find that to be just fascinating on so many levels. That's one of the things that I think has carried me through so many different types of work. And that is probably the linchpin, I think, of so much of what we all do. But if you extend that actually to like ourselves as well, as human beings in a industry, we're not what people say we are. You're not what people say you are, like your position in the org chart or your job description and lists of responsibilities or our little bios. They're all just like encapsulated constraints that try to like quickly sum you up, or lock you in and keep you in your lane. And I feel like throughout my career, one of the most wonderful things I've learned is to just challenge and break those constraints, and to bring whatever your magic sauce is to every role that you play, because what ends up happening is you become known for that magic piece of you, not the role you played. And I didn't realize that was actually happening until probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into Nike, where I started getting invited to meetings that had nothing to do with my job. And at first I was like, oh, this must be a mistake. But really what had happened is I had become known for a certain kind of way of thinking. And people wanted me in the room, even though I wasn't in that org. I didn't have any like functional responsibility for anything. And I was like, oh, so, okay, now I need to be more mindful about what's happening here. Like I've actually created an idea of me that is nothing to do with my org, my job description, my responsibility. I think that was a really powerful piece of learning that kind of seems to have snuck up on me late in the game. But I think it's interesting, especially in this highly fluctuating moment we're in.
It's really interesting what you say there, because I think it's very easy, isn't it, particularly within large organizations, to be quite sort of boxed into a particular role. So what you're saying there about your experience of Nike of being actually quite horizontal and being invited to meetings which weren't necessarily within that particular sphere or that lane. I mean, is that something you think that actually more organizations should be really doing as just a matter of course, that actually that is something that you need to be doing as any kind of an organization?
Yeah, I can't see a downside to it, honestly. I was part of a planning sort of like thought experiment once inside of Nike, where we were talking about future of organizations. And there was this kind of flip-flop dynamic we were trying to explain to some of the senior leaders about. Most companies create an org chart, a structure, and then they put jobs into this org chart. Like, okay, so this person has, 200 people, and so we're going to give them X amount of money and these responsibilities, and then these people will sit over here. And we thought, okay, let's just imagine for a moment a scenario in which we start with the people. We start with the work. What is the work that we're trying to do? What is the task?
Right.
Let's identify, we need, developers, and we need writers, and we need strategists, and we need some operational, organizational type people. Now let's map the organization up into the work. It was almost like if each one of us were tagged with these little tags, like I can write and I can strategize and I can build things. You might actually be mapped to 4 different parts of the enterprise. You wouldn't sit in marketing or in accounting or in manufacturing. You might map into all of those organizations because you have something to offer into all of those, because the work output is what we're driving towards, not building orgs and then trying to figure out how the work gets squished into the org. I don't know if I'm making myself very clear, but.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think one thing that I'm thinking about here as you're saying that is about the balance between kind of specialism and generalism, and actually that kind of dynamic of needing both of those things, the kind of vertical expertise and depth of expertise, but also the need for people to bring that together and have that kind of generalist outlook. I mean, do you see yourself as more of a generalist, really, that can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all generalists have probably a center of gravity where they feel like they can always hit it out of the park. I would say I'm a generalist strategist with a deep bench in brand. A lot of my experience has been about all of the various different ways you can express a brand, whether it's in an interaction, it's in writing, or it's visual, or it's digital, or it's in a store, or it's a brand architecture, it's a positioning, but like the brand. So I like that I'm able to go, okay, understand how brands work at the system level, at the DNA level. So now I can apply that thinking across the entire enterprise. So if the brand means X, then what do we make that proves that we believe this? And who would be our center bullseye in terms of the ideal consumer who walks and talks and lives and breathes a pairing of our belief system with us out in the world? And then who are the various degrees of separation outside of that where we can fish and bring more into the family? And then what does that mean for our store environments? Are they community centers? Are they places where we work out? Are they rarefied objects you can barely get into? Are there a lot of them? Are there a few of them? Are there none of them? Like, what does the customer service rep sound like? Say, when you pick up the app, is there any sound or haptic feedback in it that gives you a kinetic connection to your body as to what the brand means? So there's like this whole world of things you can touch, and I kind of can't stop myself from trying to touch them all and really try to figure out how to make them all be as true as possible to that central tenet.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, because I think one of the big things, one of the last things you did at Nike was, you were, of course, the global brand concept development, the senior director there, and you did the maternity, which is a really interesting kind of concept and launch, and that was, I think, a long time in the making, wasn't it? So yeah. Was that an approach you took with that, because it was so new and different?
I would first start by saying, like, I was one of just so many people that were working on this work, and I was lucky that I entered the work in the year that it actually made it out of the building into the world, because it had been worked on for many years prior to my reassignment into that team. But I can say that it's actually something I was going to touch on a little bit later in the chat that I can bring back up again. But it's one of those really great examples of where the employees drove this. Without there being a very dedicated group of women internally who really believed at this, it wouldn't have made its way out into the world. Product designers who did this on top of their regular work. And it was also an example of kind of the stakeholdership in a certain position. I mean, Nike says, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And this is a unique sort of moment for women's bodies to really actually utilize sport to get through this, arduous process successfully, and hopefully emerge on the other side without having dropped sport out of their life. But yeah, everything from the brand expression, some of which has hit the market, some of which I know is going to come later this year, and will be just so gratifying to see. But even beyond that, even this week, there was work that came out talking about how you can match your training to your menstrual cycle to have an even more successful training regimen, understanding your own rhythms and your own chemistry. This is just the beginning of a really long story.
That's fascinating. And just because you work client side and agency sides, I just want to ask as well about the lens of this across that, because obviously as an agency strategist, you naturally get to work across lots of different industries and sectors, and that's a real privilege. And then going into sort of one industry and working there for 7 years, what was that like? What was the change there? Yeah,
I was really nervous, actually, because I actually really like the agency style of work where, it's airlines in the morning and beer in the afternoon and a credit card the next morning. And, you're kind of switching gears a lot and simultaneously working on different industries. And oftentimes you can see these really interesting connections and cross-pollinate them. And I was a little worried that going client side would remove that dynamism, and that I'd grow kind of trapped or bored or something. But actually at an organization the size of Nike that is so dynamic and is so fast-paced in and of its own, I actually, I don't think it's necessarily typical what happened to me at Nike, but I did get moved around quite a lot. And so I maintained that idea. I came in the brand innovation group, and then was very quickly promoted to run global media. And then I was sent abroad to Japan for 2.5 years, and then came back and branded the new membership program, and then was moved into the Nike Women business vertical. And so I found myself seeing a lot of different components and never, ever reaching that boredom state that I was so concerned about. I don't know that that's necessarily typical, like at other companies, but at Nike, it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think probably circling back to what we began talking about the constraints and being boxed in, I think probably the lack of being boxed in probably helped, I'm sure, in that, just being able to take that more kind of generalist view. So,
yeah, I think
Sorry.
just also the entry point, the entry point being brand innovation helped me as well. Because my first introduction to a lot of different people was that I was part of the team that was meant to push the envelope and create the new. And so regardless of where I went next, people just kind of expected me to bring that ethos with me, which is the work that I came to Nike to do. And that ended up being one of those wonderful little aha moments of like, I can continue to do the innovation work from wherever I sit, because I choose to bring it to my job description, even if it's not written there. I will apply it. And then people saw me doing this, and then they wanted me to be a part of other wild ideas that were going on around the org, which was so much fun to be included. Because I think probably, I don't know, I'm assuming this is probably similar across other planners, but as you work in the agency, especially as a junior person, you want to be the one they want to have in the room. But you want the creatives to want you present. You want the client to ask for you by name. You want the senior leaders to see the value in you. And so you do a lot in your, whether you know it or not, to be wanted, to be seen as the valuable contributor. And so going into a corporate environment, I just naturally brought this muscle memory into this new organization. I want people to want me in the room. What I learned is there's actually, in a corporate environment, there's a lot of people who are like, do not put me in another room. I just want to do this thing really well for 10 years or 20 years or whatever. Don't ask me to change lanes or look up or, whereas I'm running around going, what else can I get in trouble doing here? Pick me, put me over there too. And it was I've found that a lot of the natural behaviors you pick up as a planner and a strategist in the agency really help you a lot in a corporate environment, because you are a little bit of an anomaly inside of a homogenous environment. I mean, organizations must create structure and order or they die. Therefore, that pressure, that gravitational pressure of structure and organization and homogeny is just a reality of being in there. If you're able to kind of fight it and stick your elbows out and be unique and be interested, you can find yourself dabbling in all kinds of things.
So across all of those different roles and companies, have you made any big mistakes or clangers? What's the biggest mistake you've made, and what do you learn from that?
Clangers, I love that. I think one of my biggest mistakes is actually probably just more of like a regret almost. I think conceptually, I've never had a problem speaking in front of an audience. I write well. I can explain and translate things really well, but I've never been super strong with numbers. And I think really at a young age, I became one of those kids that just kind of had a little bit of anxiety around numbers and developed a bit of an aversion to numbers. And so being able to find an industry where I felt like it was okay, I didn't need to engage in the numbers. I could just do, the creative magic and I'd be okay. Felt like, this hallelujah moment or whatever. But as I've gotten older and kind of grown up a little bit more and gotten over some of these funny things, I've realized I actually am pretty good at numbers. I don't know, maybe I just went to school in the wrong age or something. And I need to know numbers, because actually it's the numbers that allow me to do the creative work that I want to do or that I feel is right. I have to be able to prove to business people that the performance of that idea will be meaningful. And it's only until recently, like kind of late in my own game, that I've generated the language to have those conversations powerfully, not just like acceptably, but like powerfully. And the numbers game is actually really fun when you get into like the data and analytics side of the business. And that's like my brain thinks in systems. So I don't struggle to conceive of ways in which you could leverage data, or even like which data sets we might want to crash against each other. So I didn't go to school for that. And so I need more, like I need to speak more fluency in these two areas. And there's a part of me that kind of kicks myself of like, why didn't you even consider an MBA type thing, or like a certificate in whatever? Or, I mean, I see them, I think maybe the internet knows me now, that well enough. I'm getting all these targeted ads for, MIT's design business, blah, 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 or Harvard's summer curriculum, 10 weeks, blah, blah, blah. And I'm finding myself looking at them a little bit harder than ever before, because I have this regret that, gosh, when I was younger, why didn't I, stick a leg in there for a summer or something, and like give myself the gift of this level of fluency that I really have only just started to acquire, under duress and under the speed of, learning that is hard to do at this stage. Yeah, that's a regret.
There was a couple of really interesting things that you said on Ed Cotton's podcast when he interviewed you for Inspiring Futures, and that was actually relating to your point about some of the skills that you learn as an agency side strategist coming into a client side organization. And one of them, I think, was about speed and just being able to sort of go fast and actually, large organizations doing things quite slowly. And the other one was about going from wide to narrow very quickly to be able to synthesize. Yeah. It's kind of interesting that actually those skills are so useful inside an organization. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like sequencing. I think, at the agency side, we're often kind of late in the sequence. We're receiving thinking that's gone on for, who knows, a year, 18 months prior to our getting our hands on it. And there's kind of this lost context. Who came up with that idea? What did the political fight look like internally? What were the pros and cons that were being argued over? What is it? What is the thing they haven't considered yet that we know really well, because we also have another client that's working on a similar cohort of people, and we're experts. I didn't even realize when I was working in agencies how much was going on up front. But once we received, a directive or a request or a brief of some kind, we just, it was like, light a fire and run and make a lot of pivots and nuances and shining. I know what that feels like, digitally, print ad, radio, whatever, television. Now that I'm inside the upstream part and I'm part of these machinations, what I can bring with me is the real world knowledge of that is going to take a long time to make, or that is going to be easy to make, or that is going to be expensive to make, or that is going to be inexpensive, or no, we're not going to be able to find an agency to execute on that. They don't exist yet. We're going to have to create our own team, or the way media works isn't ready for this idea, or how can we hack media, or which media platforms do we think we could get come upstream with us to create. And this is the power of a brand like Nike or others, where you can actually get a platform like a Twitter or a Facebook or something to create a piece of tech on your behalf, because the platform sees the ability to reskin and resell that later. So there's all these contractual agreements that create a year's time in which they can't do so that we have an advantage. So there's all these things that happen up here. I think my knowledge of knowing how the rubber hits the road allows me to then help with the concept car up front. There's actually not that many. I had made the wrong assumption entering a company the size of Adi or Nike and thinking that everyone in the room had the same level of experience that I did, or not the level, but the types of experience that I had. I was wrong. There was very few agency people in the room. There was very few tangible understanding under the fingertips of the people sitting in the same conference room of what it actually takes to do what we're thinking we want to do. So that kind of, okay, so we're talking here. Okay, I can go right here and tell you that'll work or that won't work, or I can at least illuminate, what are the red flags, and have us come into that conversation, 6 months later with Wieden or whoever it might be, and we sit down at the table, and the conversation is different because we show up as a client, as a well-educated client, as a thoughtful sort of brief and thought starter, and as opposed to, we don't know what we're doing. Can you, this tip of the spear, help reverse engineer some of what we haven't thought about before, which is just a waste of time and energy. So it's a long way of saying, there's just so much value that people from agency side, if they have any curiosity about going brand side, or even if they have any ability to work inside of a corporate environment, because there are some things that are uncomfortable and you do feel like you get constrained a little bit, and it is slower. You know, it might drive some people crazy and they kind of bounce and almost like, you know, rebound off of the outside of the building. But yeah, what we know how to do is super valuable.
So just taking that into a kind of an industry-wide context, I guess, and thinking about marketing or advertising, whichever way you want to take, but just your observations on the big, really fundamental shifts that are happening in the industry. So from where you sit, what do you think are the most critical?
Yeah, I mean, thematically, the last 10 years have been such a trip. Like, I just feel like everything has become incredibly dynamic and entangled. Like, there's, you know, the brand is alive. Like, there's this organic like organism, but like organization. Like, it's living and breathing and sometimes stumbling quite poorly, but like, it's, the dynamism is there. It feels like some of my agency experience, albeit it's several years ago now, but there was so much siloing going on. We're going to have this core creative agency, and then we're going to have the digital agency, and then we're going to have the media agency, and we need to make sure that they can play well together. And, you know, it's set up for friction in so many ways. Even the language of, like, when I think about historical advertising marketing terms, like, it's a campaign, like it's something that starts and ends, or it's a flight. It's like a very brief launching of an idea. There's these architectures, you know, these things that don't move, or there's like an insertion order, like we're just going to put it in there and, you know, move on. They feel discrete and kind of disconnected, whereas like the new language is all around ecosystems, and it's programmatic. It kind of thinks on its own. There's these flywheel systems that create momentum and build momentum, and there's omni-channel. We're having to cross the physical and digital world and come back again, and they're very interdependent and kind of slippery, which I think is cool. I mean, I really like it. I started my career in tech and then kind of backed into a traditional agency around the age of 30 and learned how to do a print ad for the first time, and, you know, had a very quick steep learning curve for me to figure out how do I, okay, now that I've come in as like this digital person into this traditional agency, how do I stitch these things together? They're made so dramatically different. We need to get them sequenced nicely so that you can pull a creative thought through all of them, and they can hit the world, you know, in an orchestrated manner and play their roles. And so I feel like some of the words that kind of come to my mind is like this intersectionality of things. Yes, the consumer, like our consumers are actually much more intersected than we've allowed ourselves to think of them, but also across the business units. Kind of a random, maybe not a random example, but a good example from Nike is oftentimes there was the running business unit, and then there's the men's and women's training business unit, and they would have their own budgets and their own agenda and their own things. But a runner needs training. And someone who trains can use running as a training method, you know, sprints or whatever it is. But they weren't creating content that could take an athlete across these two business units and potentially like do wonderful things to the business bottom line. And that's just a historical thing that has actually changed radically in the last year with the most latest reorganization. But the organization that put Nike into that business, those vertical business units, happened in 2008 and 2009, almost 10 years ago. And so Nike's been in those lanes for 10 years and is now knocking them down. So this intersectionality is really interesting. And the horizontal nature of marketing and advertising and brand across the whole enterprise. The companies are often now making hard things and soft things. They're making like an object, and then they're making an app, or they're making a physical store, and then these intangible sort of like services, you know, that allow you to experience that retail store in a different way. Think about COVID right now. Walmart, some Targets, and these others, you know, buy online, pick up in store, and we'll bring it out to your car. Like these intangible services, they also need marketing and communication so people know they're out there and exist just as much as the objects that you're buying off the shelf. that's like the thing and the marketing of the thing, whether it's, something you hold in your hand or something that makes you feel
Yes.
allegiance to the brand in a greater way. And then just everything's so entangled, right? Like it's hard and it's messy and it's always in flight and it's never done. And the idea of launch is kind of dead now. Like we launched, we're done. It's like, no, it's iteration, it's observe and optimize it. If you turn it off, why would you turn it off? Just let it keep going. But that construct is not the way a lot of our businesses have been set up. It's really a lot more a digital mindset in which, there's a creation of something, there's a lot of Q&A done at the end, but you put it out in the world knowing now you need to maintain it and take care of it. Marketing doesn't necessarily think of their campaigns in that way. I'm going to put this campaign out there and then now I need to take care of it. I need to keep it alive. I need to evolve this story over weeks, months, and years. Normally it's like, woo, we pushed it out, Super Bowl ad, let's go to the bar and high five. Like it's not the same game anymore. It's a totally different game. So it's all entangled and it's also very emergent. It's to say that we're building the next and the new and the now as we're going down the road, which means this weird modern marketing stack is kind of stepping forth out of the fog, and we're barely starting to see the outlines of it and understand what the underpinnings and resources need to be to do it well. And it's breaking things and it's accelerating things and creating new things. So intersectional, horizontal, entangled, and emerging. Like it's fun. It's crazy and it's fun.
That's great. I mean, there's a big theme actually in what you, in your answers around this whole idea of sort of breaking out of constraints and boxes and diversity of inputs and working concurrently and collaborating in different ways. So, what do you think this means for for how you put teams together in organizations, how agencies need to work with client organizations differently? They must have pretty massive implications for that. So how do you see that?
I'm noticing, as probably just like everyone else is, that there's kind of this funny hybrid agency model that's been coming up lately, where it's like a stable of professionals and you don't sit in an office together, even if it wasn't a pandemic time. And there's kind of these bespoke squads that are assembled for tasks and then dispersed again. And that's pretty cool and interesting. There's a woman I know in New York who basically has become known as the fixer. And you can contact her and her small organization, and you, as a brand, you can brief her on what your needs are, and she'll pull in, 5 to 7 different kinds of small to medium-sized agencies who already kind of know each other because they know her, and she brings them together in a professional and social framework that she's created on Slack, where they kind of intermix. So you don't have to worry about the infighting and the elbowing each other in the eyeball, of days of yore. Like they're already kind of collaborators in loosely entangled. And so she can create an organism for you that you can decide to just run with for years, or maybe even, who knows, acquire and bring inside.
And do you think we'll see more of that kind of model where it's just coming together quickly, putting a team together, solving a problem, moving on, and just that whole kind of way of being far more responsive and adaptive to how you're solving problems and solutions and creating different outcomes?
I'm actually not sure what I think is going to happen, because I've seen so many different things, and maybe it's actually one of those things that becomes bespoke to each brand and like an expression of what the brand believes and how it behaves. Like there's a lot of internal agencies right now, or there was kind of a trend where big brands felt like they should have an internal agency. A bunch of them built them. Not all of them have stuck though. And I've been kind of wondering, like, what is it I think that allows them to thrive or to crumble? Does it have something to do with the brand and the power of marketing and brand inside the organization? I mean, that was one of the things, having worked agency side, is you will work on a client in which brand has a lot of power at the table and can influence and can bring a big budget. And you will work for clients in which brand is the pariah and they can't get anything done. And you bring them the best ideas and they can't sell them internally because they have no reputation and they don't have power. And so if you go, okay, if every brand across the world decided to make an internal agency, some of them are going to fail because brand can't sustain them. They don't know how to keep the blood flow going there. So some of that might be that. I just feel like we're in such a fluid moment. You can't see around the corners very clearly. The things that every brand needs right now is the ability to be nimble and to do that sort of like observe and optimize iterative nature of things. I don't know what the successful agency model looks like to serve that quite yet, because it feels like most of the examples we're looking at right now, and I don't want to paint too broad of a brush because I don't know all of the options on the table, but it feels like so many of them are former agency folks who are deciding to just work in a slightly different way, but they're still doing the same billing model. And so the pressures on the business, the agency side business, are the same problems. So I don't know. I'm just witnessing it as it's happening and being like, whoa, this is kind of wild to see. I've spoken to 4 or 5 of them myself as now an independent person. What would it be like to work with this group who has, 50 or 60 creative people who have 20 or more years of experience under their belt on assignments? This one's actually behaving a little bit more like actually a company. They have a culture that everyone who's part of their community must dial into the open house once a month. And so they're striving to create like more gravity there. Others are very loose. Like you just get this mysterious email and here's an assignment and please turn it in 3 days later and invoice us. So there's another one that I was invited to be a part of in which it's a really wide variety of skill sets, which is super cool. Like there's speech writers and there's PR experts and people from politics and people from brand and startup advisors. And I'm actually really excited to see where this one goes. It's only just launching now. And how is it what kind of work might we get a chance to play with? Some of these like political advisors, for example, might be able to open up some really interesting work assignments given what's happening in the world. So yeah, I don't really know. I'm just kind of like most people witnessing it happening and going, how's this going to gel out? Like, or will it? I don't know.
So if you had to make a prediction really for the future of marketing, advertising, or even planning itself, what do you think that would be?
I mean, I'm thinking kind of expansively right now because I get to, and that's typically the kind of work that people want me to do for them, and it's the work I like to do. And so I'm thinking about big themes like taking the longer view. I think it's not good enough to only know what's going to happen next quarter or next year. It's just not good enough. Even if you're a startup, like imagine you're a startup and you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing 6 months from now or a year from now. We may be out of business. That does not let you off the hook to not have a projection into the future of what you want your business to be doing 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. It will inform every decision you make in the now. And without it, you're untethered. Now, for a brand that's been in business for 50 years or 80 years, 100 years already, like you should definitely have the ability to be thinking forward into several years and decades. And it's also not good enough if you're unable to describe to yourself and to your consumers how what you do is beneficial to this generation, but also the next generation, particularly the impact on the environment. And as we're seeing, impacts on society. A lot of the racism that has been kind of illuminated through the last summer and made crystalline and unable to say, this doesn't exist, I don't see it. Like, yeah, you see it now. That doesn't come from nowhere. That's decades, hundreds of years of a system that refused to let it go and didn't purge it. You can see how much damage it's creating this generation. Every brand has a responsibility. It's not good enough to not be able to understand your contribution to this generation and the next in a lot of different ways. It's not good enough to be disengaged from these kinds of social movements. Where are these social movements coming from? What are they driving towards? I mean, even in this specific moment, like last week was when we saw this insurgence on the Capitol of our United States. Corporations right now, today, this week, are hyper analyzing all their corporate giving and really understanding, where is our money flowing and is it responsible? And are we exposed in any way? You can't just be like, oh, that's just this thing happening over there. Like, it's not good enough to not be engaged in that. And I'm fascinated by the specialty of design fiction and the practice of design fiction, which is kind of starting to have its moment, or its potential moment of emergence as a tool for brands. It's or an additive team or what have you, but it's basically allowing yourself to think into the future in a way that creates possibilities. And also creates illumination and tactile understanding for potential, sliding doors narratives. And there's some people who I've been connecting with recently who are experts at this work. And I just keep seeing it. My brain just keeps firing on like how important this work can be, and allowing those stories and narratives and artifacts that you create through a design fiction practice to help senior leaders in an organization, like a CEO or a COO, people who are very focused on the job at hand in front of them, get them to easily grasp, what some of these potential outcomes could look like, and decisions that they could make differently today that would have ramifications that would echo. So that's one thing that I've been really just marinating in. But I think going forward, like we need to edit. Like, just because there's all of these social media platforms doesn't mean you have to be on all of them. Like, figure out the right ones that are for your brand and for the thing you're trying to do, and like distill and make it easy to remember and easy to interact with, and make it easy to tell somebody else about. There's so much shit out here right now. There's so much discussion and talk and lies and deception and illusion. Just be clear. Just edit yourself down and be proud and step forward into the most like crystallized version of yourself, and express it in a crystallized way. And I think the other thing is just everyone's talking a lot about the stakeholders, the shareholders to stakeholders shift. And I think that's huge. I think it's really big. And this was the thing I wanted to raise that I mentioned earlier about the Nike women example and the maternity collection. I think of stakeholders as starting with the employees. If you've got an idea and you're going to like start a company and get going, every single human body that you bring into that mission is your initial stakeholder. They have decided to spend time with you and your business idea instead of their family, and to focus a huge amount of their energy day in and day out on what you're trying to do. They're your initial stakeholder. From there, you go to, in this sort of modern age, like your customers, your known customers, your VIPs, your members, those who have a profile with you, who you have some information on. They're your next stakeholder. From there, you go to the anonymous consumer world, people who have a propensity to be your customer, or people who buy but just aren't as close in. They're also a stakeholder, because they also believe they've chosen they pulled out their wallet and they've voted for you. They're not to be ignored. From there, there's local communities. Where are you doing business? Who are the communities that are supporting you, and how are you giving back? And then last is the shareholders. They're just the ones benefiting off the backs of all these other stakeholders. And that's why you need to take care of them first. And so this maternity collection was born from Nike employees. They wanted to do this. They saw the importance of it. They believed, and they pushed, and they worked, and they fought, and they invested their personal time, their personal passion, and it was on the backs of them that this thing came forward. When we came to launch time, though, that's when the really interesting questions cropped up that I think are right for brands to be asking themselves. Are we ready for this? Are we exposed if we come out to the world in celebration of this in any way, shape, or form? I.e., what do our employees feel about being a woman at Nike, or being a mother at Nike, or being a pregnant woman at Nike? Have we done all we can for our own core constituents that allow this story to go out in the world as an expression of that? And so you're launching from the inside out. We gave maternity testing kits of this product to our employees first. We actually sold it first to members. Members get access. We actually had a ton of people become members because it's so easy to, because they wanted access to that product, and then go to the marketplace. So I don't think, before me personally, just having had that experience over the last summer, like never before was that example like so clear that everything really starts from the employee and moves out. And when I talk to comms people, they start to go, oh, aha, I need to create a PR and a comms strategy that begins with the internal storytelling at the headquarters and through the employee channels, and give them early information, early access. Then we go out into the external world.
I love that. And I love what you're saying there about possible futures as well. I mean, that's so interesting, because I think in organizations, we spend a lot of time in preferable futures or probable futures. We kind of extrapolate out from where we are now, based on current assumptions and the way technology works now, the way, without actually reimagining what might become possible in a year, 2 years, 3 years time, and how that might actually create new possible futures. So is that what you mean by the kind of design fiction and actually reimagining what possibilities are there?
Yeah, design fiction, I think, can do it can do the really sort of like, I think maybe it's misunderstood in some places. People think it's all very dreamy and science fiction-y and kind of like woo-woo or something. But like a really practical application of it is, I was talking to a startup CEO the other day, and he was saying that he had worked with one of our co-friends who is a design fiction expert on imagining what his balance sheet would look like 5 years from now, because he was going out and trying to pitch for further investment. And so they were just having a coffee talk, and the design fiction expert told this guy, he's like, you're trying to show this group of people that you're going to be in business 5 years from now, and illustrate to them in the most tangible way that this is not just a pipe dream, but it's a fact. And so in order to do that, let's now project into the future 5 years together and create an artifact from the future that you can show them that proves you've hired the right people in the right sequencing, you've made the right investments at the right moments, and this is what it looks like. And so sometimes in advertising, I've been parts of workshops where sometimes we've said things like, okay, we're getting ready to launch this big campaign. Let's all sit down for a moment and write 2 New York Times headlines. One headline is, if this really works, what is the headline going to say? And if this really bombs, what is this headline going to say? And we try to like project what we want it to say, what we don't want it to say, and see if there's anything we've left out of the equation before we go public, before we, press launch. Is there anything else we need to do? That is kind of like a tiny little design fiction, module, if you will. But there's been even examples at Nike where I worked with a design fiction person on a magazine from the future for the running community. And so the articles that were inside there were about different training regimens, and like some of them were a little bit fantastical, but also not that much fantastical. Good design fiction usually walks the line a little bit. You could, if you were training for the Olympics, get a little chip inserted under your wrist. It would modulate your blood and your hydration levels. It would let you know if you're missing a mineral. There was all these different services and physical objects that you could acquire in order to become the best runner you could ever be. And we were able to create that almost like a zine and like distribute it around internally as like, look, this is where the world of running is going. And because you're reading it like an actual magazine, it's been laid out beautifully, it's been well shot, it's been well illustrated and written. There's a part of your brain that just accepts it. And it allows that you then to have this projectionist sort of conversation with like 50 people, which if you're just up there with a PowerPoint waving your hands around, you struggle and kind of start to feel like you're sinking. Artifacts go a long way. I love that. Great. So I think we're running short on time, unfortunately. But so if I can ask my final question, which is, if there was a question that you wished I'd asked you, what would that be? So what's the answer to that? I think I would say I would go towards like, what is it like to be in this industry and in in this world as a working woman and as a working mother, and how do you make it go? I actually get that question from younger colleagues from time to time. And and I've also, commiserated with my fair share of peers. And I think it's worth just saying that in this moment in time in history, like, it's still hard. It's still, the agency world is still very, I think, male. And the corporate world is still very male, and sport is definitely very male. Digital is still very male. Like, and those are actually the worlds that I've been playing in, the agency world, the corporate world, the digital world, the sport world. So I've seen a lot of bad behavior, and I've had to navigate it myself, particularly as a younger woman. But that has led to me to be fairly hell-bent on ushering out a bygone age of what I would call toxic leadership. And I've seen both men and women doing it, but I think it comes from poor training of many generations and decades prior. And I'd love to see it exit the building as swiftly and as peacefully as possible. And so, being the pragmatist, but also the strategist, I start thinking a lot about, well, what are the little hacks that you can do to help this happen? It doesn't need to be a bare knuckle brawl on the back alley, to make things better. I think when I was younger, I was way more focused on keeping myself safe and keeping myself out of bad situations and unencumbered as much as possible by, some of the broken aspects of our system. But now I'm trying to dismantle some things. And so I have to remind myself sometimes that just being present and visible is a victory. You don't always have to be the hero of any particular vignette, like the hero of a project or the hero of a workshop or the hero of a meeting, to have made an impact on someone. There's a lot of meetings I've been in where I'm the only woman. And so I realize I'm not just here to do this work, I'm here to represent. And I'm here to show people that there actually needs to be more people like me here, and that I can do this work and I can do it at a high level. And I need to then start making more space for other people. I think being a working mom is tough for the obvious reasons. You're pulled in a lot of directions. You often don't feel like you're getting it right in all of those directions because you're having to split hairs. And I think that's probably true of just parents in general. The thing that saved me mentally, I stumbled into it probably 7 years ago or 10 years ago, was this idea of focusing on my legacy. And my legacy are my kids. Like, they're the only people that are going to remember me after I'm gone. My stupid boss who doesn't understand what I'm trying to do is not going to remember me. My clients aren't going to remember me. The work isn't going to be remembered. But my children will tell stories about me to people who haven't been born yet. And that, to me, like, really grips me and reminds me that, like, hey, put the right amount of effort in the right places, distribute your energy in as much of a balance as you can do. And that's the thing about balance. You never get it. You never achieve it. You certainly can't hold it. But it's about the journey, or it's about, like, the battle. It's about not giving up on the attempt to achieve some level of something that feels balance-ish, or has moments where you actually stop and go, oh, today was balanced. Felt really good. Need to, like, just put that little notch in my belt, like, because it's hard to get those days. And when they happen, you have to enjoy them. And I also feel it's really critical that hacking system is about kind of displaying to your colleagues and your cohorts a different style of leadership, a different example of strength, without being a jerk, how you can be critical, hypercritical, even in some cases, without being, without giving insult and without giving injury, to, really earn a place in a room so that you can bring other people into the room with you, even if it's just with your own voice. Like, thank you for inviting me to be here to represent this work. I didn't make it. It was Lisa and it was Tom and it was Jake. They did this, that, and the other. They're the ones who are the experts. I'd love to be here, but because they can't be, I'm going to speak on their behalf. And really just identify yourself as, like, a mouthpiece for other people's talent. That's something that a lot of people don't know how to do or are completely unwilling to do. But I've learned so much from a lot of my own teams over the last few years that they're just really hungry for that kind of representation. And you have to show people you're protecting them, and show people that you're also pushing them out on the ledge. There's a really salient example that just happened even in the last week that I'm almost a little nervous to say, because it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but I also feel like it's like a turning point for me personally. I think it could be a good example is I recently interviewed for a job that I really, really wanted, but that I did not get. And I was very disappointed, and I was very curious about who got that job. And I was going to find out who got that job because I wanted to know who I lost to. In my mind's eye, in my negative mind's eye, I had pictured like this white male taking this job away from me. Like it just was like this negative story I had created, which is kind of silly. But our subjective minds, our unconscious biases are always running around. Turns out I lost the job to a woman, and to a woman of color, and to someone that I worked with at Nike. But I didn't know very well, but nonetheless, like we were both there at the same time. I had this immediate moment of like competitive frustration and disappointment, but I was really proud of myself because very quickly I pivoted and was like, right on. They hired a Black woman. This is great. Like if I have to lose to anybody, I want to lose to someone who really deserves to be in a leadership position, who's going to get out there and like run a team, change the dynamic, push the story forward. And so I have booked time to talk to her in about 10 days. And I want to commiserate with her. I want to tell her everything I learned during my thing. And I want to ask her how I can support her, because that's cool. And it's cool that they made that choice as well. And it also makes me even more in love with that brand because I respected that choice that they made. And so I think more women, I think energy is a viral thing. We've seen what it does in a negative sense at the Capitol last week. Energy can create problems, but energy is a viral substance. And it's also like, if you think of the sun and everything the sun grows and powers, like you put energy out in the world, you have no idea where that energy is going. And if you put positive energy out into the world, it manifests in ways that are mysterious. And sometimes you don't even know the full ramifications of it. And I feel like that is a really critical component of like this new leadership style, or like a modern leadership style, or a different, if anything, more evolved leadership style. I'd like to see more companies leveraging, and just the idea that we need to stick together. Women need to stick together. We need to compete because competition creates better outcomes, but respectfully, and also linking arms a lot. So I guess that was my last and final question.
And what a wonderful answer to the final question. Thanks, Katie. I think I love the thought of energy as a viral substance. That's just a lovely sort of concept, that, isn't it? But unfortunately, we're out of time. I could speak to you all day, I think. But thank you so much for being part of Firestarters. Great to have you. And for everybody watching, don't forget to give us a like and share on social media, and of course do look out for future episodes of Google Firestarters. But allow me to thank you, Katie, very much for being part of Firestarters, and yeah, great to talk to you. So thank you very much.